Hello, and welcome to my kind of, sort of, not quite Let's Play channel. I've been using this channel to dump raw, unedited gameplay footage with no commentary, mostly as an archive of gameplay footage for myself. But I'm trying something a little bit different right now. If you've already watched the Federation Let's Play that I uploaded earlier, then you've already heard all of this, but I'm going to repeat it for anyone who's watching this first. But if you already heard it, feel free to skip to the actual start of the Let's Play at the time code indicated on screen. I've been very busy and also quite a bit stressed out by a project at my real job because, doing YouTube stuff and blogging isn't my actual job. I do have a real 9-to-5 Monday through Friday job as well. And because of that job and the stress, I haven't been keeping up with my production schedule for my regular video essay and critique channel. This past 2 weeks, I did manage to get a little bit caught up in some of the written content on my blog at www.megabearsfan.net, but my video content is still way behind schedule. I have several projects in the works, but they are all going very slowly, including a very large project about Star Trek video games, in which this particular game is featured. So I wanted to try to put something together quick, and I decided to try doing one of these non-scripted playthrough commentaries with minimal editing in the hopes that I could get something out on YouTube in like a few hours instead of having to spend days or weeks, writing scripts and editing scripts and narrating and then editing everything together. And since I've had Star Trek on the mind a lot lately, and since I've been playing Star Trek Infinite and a lot of other Star Trek games as part of my research for that lengthy Star Trek project, I thought I'd leverage some of my existing gameplay and footage to create new content, and I'm going to try to do a bit of a Let's Play thing with some commentary. I'm at least doing the Federation and Klingon campaigns, and I already published the first part of the Federation campaign, so you may have already seen that, and I might do the other two campaigns in Star Trek Infinite as well. We'll see. In any case, the first part of the Federation and Klingon playthroughs will be free on this channel, and any subsequent installments, whether I add commentary to them or not, in these particular playthroughs, will become Patreon-exclusive content. I'm going to talk about my general thoughts about Star Trek Infinite, walk you through some of what I'm doing in this playthrough, and maybe go over a little bit of strategy. Since I spent almost all of the Federation Let's Play basically re-reviewing the game, I'm going to try to put more emphasis this time on walking you through the actual strategy and gameplay for this Klingon campaign. If all of this goes well, I might do more content like this in the future. So if you enjoy this particular content, please like, subscribe, comment, do all the usual algorithm stuff, and then also check out my main video essay channel, which is just called Mega Bears Fan. And maybe also consider supporting my content creation on Patreon. There will be a link to my Patreon entry survey in the video description, so if you do become a patron, you can tell me in that entry survey that this specific video was what inspired you to contribute, and that will tell me that, yes, I guess I should do more stuff like this. Thanks in advance to anybody who does contribute, as you're helping to offset the costs that I have to pay to maintain my personal blog website, as well as the licenses for the software that I use to put together my fully edited video essays. My channels are not monetized, I don't get any ad revenue from this or from my personal blog, so any income that I get to offset the costs all come from the support of patrons like you. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all of my current patrons and all former patrons. Your support really has meant a lot. Anyway, as you already know if you've watched the Federation Let's Play, I was really excited about the announcement of Star Trek Infinite. My absolute favorite Star Trek game ever, and one of my favorite video games of all time, is an old Windows 98 CD-ROM game called Birth of the Federation. It was a 4X Star Trek Grand Strategy game developed by Microprose. Basically, it was a Star Trek reskin of Master of Orion 2. I've been itching for a sequel or spiritual successor to Birth of the Federation for like 25 years now, and I was really hoping that Star Trek Infinite would be it. Further, there was a popular mod for Stellaris called New Horizons, which was a Star Trek Total Conversion mod. It was a pretty awesome mod. It had dozens of playable factions, went through the entire history of Star Trek, and even had scripted events and storylines that mirrored some of the events of the shows and movies. When Infinite was announced, I, along with many others, thought that it was basically just going to be an official release of that mod. Like, I honestly thought that Paradox had just hired the creators of New Horizon to polish and expand the mod a little bit more and then release it as a full retail game. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and one of the biggest complaints that I have with Infinite is its limited scope, especially in comparison to New Horizons. It takes place entirely within the Next Generation era and only has 4 playable factions. I mean, even Birth of the Federation from 25 years ago had a 5th playable faction. So needless to say, Infinite did not end up being the Birth of the Federation's successor that I had been waiting a literal quarter of a century for. Worse yet, the game launched with a lot of bugs, wasn't reviewed particularly well, and didn't sell particularly well. And Paradox shuttered the development studio and canceled all further updates and DLC plans. And this is one of those games that I feel just needs DLC or expansions. So it's a damn shame that it was abandoned so quickly. Also, I want to remind everyone that there's a weird recording problem that I had with this game. I've been playing it on a laptop that has a non-standard screen aspect ratio and a native resolution. The laptop is, I think, a 2560 by 1600 resolution monitor. And for whatever reason, Star Trek Infinite defaults to the native screen resolution and locks that setting so that I can't change it. I'm not sure if this is the case with everybody's installation of the game or if it's just some fluke with my particular hardware configuration. But the Microsoft game capture software that I used to get the footage of the gameplay is at a much higher resolution, and so the footage was shrunk into the top left corner of the screen with black bars along the right and bottom. I had to throw the footage into Premiere to rescale it to full screen, but for some reason the mouse position was not rescaled by the game capture software, so it's like in the actual screen position that it was in when I was playing the game. And so when I had to rescale the actual gameplay footage, that means that now the mouse position is offset in both the X and Y axis. So the mouse that you're seeing on screen isn't pointing to what I'm actually pointing at in-game. I've tried to fix this, but I couldn't figure out how. Thankfully, Paradox puts pop-ups and tooltips on like everything in their games, so you should still have a pretty good idea of what my mouse is pointing at any given time. So all that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into Star Trek Infinite and check out the Klingon campaign. So, as I mentioned just a moment ago, and also in the Federation playthrough, Star Trek Infinite is not the galaxy-spanning, era-spanning Star Trek 4X strategy game that I was hoping it would be. It only takes place in the Alpha and Beta quadrants, only has these 4 factions that you're seeing now, and it takes place entirely within the Next Generation era. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you listen to most of the tutorial explanations of how things work this time around, since I kind of talked through all of that during the Federation playthrough. Then, when all of the basic tutorials are done, I'll get back to giving my own commentary, so feel free to skip the tutorial bits if you just want to hear my thoughts and ramblings, and you can skip to the time code that will be displayed on the screen.
Nay, High Counselor, even the bravest Klingon may need counsel when navigating the warrior's path. A Klingon does all they can to make their ancestors proud, and to honor Carless. To fail at these eternal principles would be a fate worse than death. Keep AI advice turned on. Tips are enabled. The planet's summary screen shows us important details about a world and its people, including its districts, resource production and consumption rates, current levels of stability, and planetary designation, if any have been set. Planets can be set to automatically be managed here as well. Starbases are the beating hearts of our empire. Every starbase we build brings a new system under rule. We can also claim the starbases built by our enemies by right of conquest. And why wouldn't we? We are Klingons. Starbases can be upgraded to include shipyards and other valuable modules. Their presence in a system also grows our borders and increases the warp range of our starships. Once a starbase is built and that system falls under our hegemony, we are free to build research and mining stations there, or to terraform and settle any worlds that may be hospitable to life. Fleets are the soul of the Klingon Empire's military doctrine. The ability of our warships to hold formation while they hunt and destroy their prey is second to none. An admiral should ideally be assigned to command each individual fleet. Mining station harvest minerals and strategic resources from the depths of asteroids, planetoids, and other orbiting bodies. Colonies do not need mining stations to access these precious ores, as they already have the necessary infrastructure at surface level. Mining stations must be built inside our civilization's borders. Research stations monitor star systems and collect publishable research based on the data they gather. This is our construction ship, which is used for building orbital stations. Once a star system has been fully surveyed, we can order our construction ship to move there and build research and mining stations if the relevant deposits exist in the system's orbital bodies. Though most of these processes are automated, the raw materials still need to be transported to their destinations. The governance screen shows our current ruler, values, and any modifiers that may be affecting the day-to-day functioning of our civilization. Our demographics data can also be viewed in the tab below. The mission tree shows the possible fates of the Klingon Empire. Each node describes moments in time that have fundamentally changed or will change our collective destiny. Anything is possible, but only if we are bold. Edicts are proclamations that change the priorities of our economy through the weight of law. Most edicts carry a penalty, which can be viewed in the tooltip. Edict proclaimed. Policies are the laws to which our government and citizens are bound. Though nothing is set in stone, some legal positions cannot be taken by every type of government, and some may be further limited by our level of technology. The Leaders menu is where we can hire, dismiss, or assign governors, scientists, admirals, generals, and spies in need of work. Spies are not immediately available upon the game's start, due to extenuating political circumstances in the galaxy. If they are still unavailable at the time of this message, they will return shortly. Technologies are where we will dedicate the majority of our research. There are few limits to what our scientists can discover. Behold, the galaxy we will conquer. Most vessels cannot travel forever, with the exception of science ships. A starship's warp range determines the maximum reach it can move in a given direction. A ship's warp range is determined by its proximity to the nearest starbase. Building starbases will increase our overall warp bubble, allowing us to position our fleets wherever we choose. Diplomatic constraints, such as cowardly civilizations closing their borders to us, will decrease a starship's warp range. Pay attention to who allows us to travel freely through their territory. While this map is open, clicking on another civilization's territory can provide some basic information about them. Changing the map mode can reveal different information, such as others' opinions of us, AI attitude, and more. The contact screen is where we can view all of our foes and allies in the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Though their opinion of us does not matter, we can view that too, as well as any diplomatic actions we might take with them. We have low intel about this civilization. We can increase our intelligence gathering abilities by sending our spy ship to perform missions on their colonies and starbase.
Alright, so as I mentioned before, Star Trek Infinite starts after the Romulan attack on Khitomer. So being Klingons, I cannot let this offense to the Empire go unpunished, so my first point of order is going to be to liberate Khitomer from Romulan control. As such, I'm going to be building fleets and armies and doing combat in order to capture and hold the planet. But one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to send my science ship over to survey this warp highway, and then also head down to that system just south of Federation space. I'm doing this because I know there's going to be a system with the habitable planet and also a system with dilithium there, and I want to survey those planets and claim them, hopefully before the Federation does. I don't really care so much about surveying and claiming Wolf 359. I want the dilithium system in particular first, so I'm not going to be able to get Wolf 359 before the Federation or Romulans claim it. But I will check out this other planet in that region, you know, just to see what's there and if it's worth making an effort to claim it a little bit later on. So, Khitomer, as most Star Trek fans should probably know, was a Romulan sneak attack on a Klingon colony that killed Worf's parents, and for which Worf's parents were framed for collaborating with the Romulan attackers. At the beginning of the game, like, all your spies are basically being used up trying to figure out what happened here and who's responsible. And so we're not going to get any spies until after that event is resolved, and I think it's the same for all the other factions too.
The actions of the other civilizations in the galaxy.
And as you can see, my science ship now is at the Warp Highway node. So I talked a lot about warp highways in the Federation Let's Play, and also about how this concept is one of my favorite concepts in the game. I also mentioned how most of the maps that I've played included a warp highway node in this particular region of the map, next to Wolf 359, and in that unclaimed region between Federation, Klingon, and Romulan borders. The Federation playthrough that I did previously was one of the few, maybe even the only map that I've ever played in this game that did not have a warp highway node in that part of the map. So
specific entry and exit points. Think of them as a sort of navigational shortcut. No one knows whether the warp highways in our galaxy occurred naturally or were put there, but their well-worn subspace composition tells us we were likely not the first to use them.
So, the thing that I really like about the warp highways as a concept is that it resolves some outstanding continuity issues with how the hell warp drives and how fast warp speeds are in Star Trek. So, there is a lot of disagreement between various Star Trek episodes and the movies in particular about how fast warp speed is and how far ships can travel in a certain amount of time. So, in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, in particular, the Enterprise A goes from Earth to Nimbus 3, which is a planet on the border of the Federation Romulan and Klingon territories, and then from Nimbus 3 all the way to the center of the galaxy, right? And the center of the galaxy is about, we'll say maybe one-third of the distance that Voyager would have had to travel to get from the Delta Quadrant back to Earth. And of course, that trip is going to take Voyager, which is a much faster ship than the Enterprise A, 70 years or more to do. So traveling from Federation space to the center of the galaxy is a trip that should probably take somewhere on the order of 20 to 25 years, probably considerably longer for a ship in the original series movie era because they're much less advanced technology, much slower ships. In Star Trek V, that entire movie takes place aggressively, maybe in as little as like 2 days, maybe 3 days if you include the camping scenes. More conservatively, maybe if you say that like Kirk and Spock and McCoy spent like a couple days in the brig, and then maybe there was a couple days of traveling to the center of the galaxy after they get out of the brig, and Sybok, does his voodoo mind meld magic stuff with Spock and McCoy to show them their pain. Then, like, maybe conservatively, that movie takes place over the course of, like, a week, maybe a couple of weeks if you really want to stretch how much time happens, like, between some of the scenes. But, like, in any case, we're talking about something on the order of days, right? Not decades. So, that's a problem for people who care about continuity. And I know that Leonard Nimoy had an interesting quote about continuity in the fan base back when the 2009 prequel reboot movies came out. Leonard Nimoy said, "Canon is only important to certain people because they have to cling to their knowledge of the minutiae. Open your mind. Be a Star Trek fan and open your mind and say, where does Star Trek want to take me now?" And I'm going to go ahead and say that in many regards, Leonard Nimoy is correct. Star Trek is a series of stories, right? First and foremost. And the most important thing is that you tell a good story. And if you can tell a better story by fudging or maybe even just outright breaking established rules, right? Then that's fine. And if it's a good story, if it's a really good story, people will forgive and they'll look the other way and they'll allow it. At the end of the day, these are made-up rules in a fictional universe. You can fudge them to tell a good story, right? It's not like we're trying to tell like a historic drama over here where, actual knowledge of like real history matters. But at the same time, one of the things that a lot of Star Trek fans like about Star Trek, in contrast to something like, say, Star Wars, is that Star Trek has always been much more grounded in real and plausible science. Almost all of the science that's in Star Trek is something that was thought plausible by, scientists and the general public at the time that the episode was created. I mean, there's a lot of silliness. You've got a lot of original series episodes in particular that have a frustrating fascination with things like ESP, which the scientific community never really took seriously, but the general public thought like it was serious, and that bled into science fiction authorship at the time. So, we Star Trek fans do care about things like getting the science right, like a lot more than, say, Star Wars fans do. The problem is that Star Trek now is also a multimedia franchise, and one of the media in which Star Trek takes place is video games. And games rely on very rigid rule sets in order to work. And as an avid gamer and a Star Trek fan, those rules matter to me. Because it's very difficult to make a game if you don't have firm rules. And Star Trek games in particular, it would be impossible for those games to both model the original Enterprise traveling to the center of the galaxy in a matter of days, and also make it so that Voyager needs to spend an entire human lifetime traveling back to Earth from the Delta Quadrant. Like, those are not reconcilable. And a video game with a rigid warp speed cannot accommodate both of those. Unless that game has something along the lines of these warp highways, which this game has, which allows that rule to be broken by creating a new rule. Alright, so I'm about to get an event pop up that we also saw in the previous episode that I think I talked about a little bit, this chromatic vortex. So something that you'll notice about the way that I approach these event choices in this Klingon campaign compared to the Federation campaign is that I make different choices. That's mostly going to be because the resources that I want and need for the Klingon campaign are different than the resources that I want for the Federation campaign. Since the Federation lacks ways to generate more influence, I always favor taking options that grant influence for the Federation, if they're available and if they, make sense. With the Klingons, however, I can generate plenty of influence, so I'm going to be running a wartime economy, and I will actually be looking for a combination of different resources. Mainly, I want a large buffer of energy, and we'll talk about why that is later, when it becomes more relevant. And so I'm going to take energy in a lot of cases where it's convenient to do so, but I might take other resources as well. And now you might notice at the bottom of the screen, you might have seen a little Federation science ship pop up that's going down towards those same planets that I'm surveying. I am going to get to claim at least the important dilithium one. I think the Federation might get the one with the M-class planet. But anyway, when you see something like that, you gotta pay attention, because if the Federation surveys those planets first and gets a construction ship down there to build an outpost, then they claim the planet, and I don't. So the planet that I want most isn't Drago, which is the one with the M-class planet. The planet I want is the one next to it, which is going to be Beta Pente, which has a dilithium deposit on it. So I need to make sure that I get my science ship to survey Beta Pente before the Federation does, and get my construction ship down there to build an outpost before the Federation does. And I will be able to do that. And I'm not going to have to go too far out of my way to do it, because the Federation isn't exactly rushing construction ships down there itself. Probably owing in large part to the difficulty level of the game. I'm playing it on the default normal difficulty setting. So the AIs aren't super aggressive about claiming sectors and colonizing planets, or at going to war. I wish that more of these phenomenon and anomalies that you find through these events were actually things on the map. So there's an event right there that popped up that was talking about an erratic pulsar or something like that. And it's well, the pulsar is a friggin' star. That should be on the map. That should be a node on the map. I don't know why it isn't. It would be nice if stuff like that were. And it would be kind of nice to have things like nebula and well, I guess there are kind of nebula, and then the stars are inside the nebula. But it'd be kind of nice to just have nodes on the map that aren't just star systems with planets on them, but to have nodes that are, more like we have the highway nodes and we have the black holes and stuff like that. It'd be nice to have more nodes that are just weird phenomenon that your ships can go to, and maybe do some like research or whatever there. All right, so it looks like we got our first tradition. So I think I already might have adopted the honor tradition. I already opened it a little earlier. But so we're going to be focusing, I think, on the honor tradition because it gives a lot of combat bonuses, which we're going to use in our invasion of Khitomer. So I think the first one we're taking is going to give just our ships a modifier increase to their weapon damage. So that'll come in handy when we eventually fight the Romulans. And here's our subspace disturbance, which is actually the first event in the Borg story chain, which is instructing me to go towards the... Well, I guess not instructing me to go there, because you end up finding the Borg at highway nodes, but this particular highway node is near the neutral zone, next to Wolf 359, where it should be, unlike in the Federation playthrough, where it was, way down south, closer to the edge of the galaxy. And there's that Federation science ship going to Beta Penthe. I was there first, so I've got a pretty good shot at surveying it first. I mean, I definitely should survey it first, although the Federation might have buffs to its survey speed, so you never know. Alright, so now the Khitomer report is out. Our spies are basically done trying to figure out what the heck was going on. They think the House of Moog is guilty, of course. And now the spy that was investigating that, presumably, is now available for me to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send him on a tour of Romulan space. I'm going to go through all the Romulan systems that have planets on them, just to scout out where their fleets are and how powerful their fleets are, so that I have a good idea of how big my fleets need to be in order to reliably be able to defeat them in a war. Either way, I'm going to need at least 2 fleets, because I'm going to have one fleet that's actually going to attack the systems, and then I'll want a second fleet which I could pull back into Klingon space if the Romulans decide to counterattack into Klingon territory. So I want one fleet to definitely stay in Romulan space. The second fleet will stay in Romulan space if it can, assisting in the attacks. But that second fleet will also pull back into Klingon space for defense if it has to, because I don't want the Romulans coming in and knocking out all of my outposts, because that'll just drag out the war longer than it needs to be, and I want this war to be over quickly. I want quick and decisive strike to retake Khitomer and make it Klingon again. And I'm also going to be using my spies a lot to do counter-espionage on Klingon planets, because I suspect that there might be some Romulan spy foul play going on as well, but I still don't really understand how counter-espionage works. And the game isn't great about explaining, like, I'll get notifications every now and then saying that there was a spy in one of my systems, and I'm not sure what the heck I'm supposed to do with that information, because even if I send my spy over there to do counter-espionage, like, nothing ever comes of it. So, I guess you just have to be lucky and have your own spy there, but, like, the counter-espionage missions are real quick. So are you supposed to just keep re-queuing it over and over and over again? I don't know. Like, I wish the game explained some of this stuff a little bit better. You know, I miss the good old days when video games came with instruction manuals. You know, I remember getting Birth of the Federation for the first time, which had, like, a giant friggin' manual, and was waiting for the game to install, and went and sat in the toilet and read the instruction manual. I think anybody who's in my age group, who's playing, you know, PC games in particular back in the day, probably have similar memories of, waiting for the game to install or sitting on the toilet reading the instruction manual.
A new tradition to sharpen us.
Alright, so if you read my review of this game on my blog, you may remember that one of my complaints with the event and quest system in this game is that sometimes it doesn't give the player enough time to realistically complete the requirements. And there's an event that's about to come up about a tea plantation that is a very good example of this, because in my first few attempts at a Klingon campaign, I did not try training the soldiers that are necessary to complete this event, or a second science ship until after that event popped up. But by the time that I had trained the soldiers, because you need 3 of them, and built the science ship, and recruited a scientist, and sent all of them to the system, the event had expired. It gives you like 700 days, which is a long time. I mean, it's 2 years, but building stuff also takes a long time. And, I think I got through like 2 of the troops and then ran out of time while trying to train the 3rd one. Or maybe I did train the 3rd one, but there just wasn't enough time for them to warp over there. The event expired when they were en route. And part of that was I didn't plan in advance, and I was lacking enough minerals or resources to build everything. So I had to wait until I had resources, which just made things worse. But this time, in every subsequent game, I've known this event is coming up, and I want one of the rewards from it. So I trained soldiers, and I started building a second science ship in advance of the event occurring, so that I will have those ready to deploy when this tea time event pops up. So I think I already have my 3 troop transports. I'm just waiting for them to get into orbit of the planet, and then I go ahead and start researching the event. And now I also get to research some new technologies. And, envoys? Klingons don't need no stinking envoys. Klingons don't even have a word for peacemaker yet. Or do we? Is this before Curzon Dax? I am honestly not sure when exactly that happens in the timeline. I think we're still before Curzon Dax. I think that was after Khitomer. And here's another interesting Klingon event, which is the Worf and Dax marriage, although in this case I don't think they're meant to be Worf and Dax, they're other characters. Which I guess maybe means that Curzon already existed, because supposedly this would be the Dax symbiont doing this, but anyway, I really wanted to take the choice of testing the Trill's worth just to see what would happen, but I also really didn't want to take that minus 100 point hit in relations with the Federation, because I do want to be trading with the Federation, and I don't want to have to go to war with them, at least not until after I'm done dealing with the Romulans. So I ended up not being racist and, let this unholy union between a Klingon and a Trill take place. So my overall plan, obviously I already talked about Khitomer, but after Khitomer, I might do like 1 or 2 more wars with the Romulans to take maybe a couple more of their systems. And then my plan is I want to start conquering some of the minor factions that will show up in the Beta Quadrant, before the Federation has a chance to encounter them and schmooze them into joining the Federation, because I don't want to be surrounded by Federation borders on all sides, but I also don't want to fight the Federation directly. So one of the other things that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be kind of trying to colonize a line of systems going south from Klingon space down towards the edge of the galaxy to kind of build a wall to block the Federation from expanding into the Beta Quadrant through, regular outpost construction and colonization, and then hopefully also limit their ability to get science ships into the Beta Quadrant. in order to meet minor factions that are there. But of course, I can't completely stop that because that highway node exists next to Wolf 359, and that highway node allows them to bypass Klingon space and get to the Beta Quadrant, which is one of the interesting strategic things about those highway nodes, is that they allow access through or past closed borders. So, short of completely surrounding the other end of that highway node with Klingon systems so that the Federation ships can't leave the highway node, there is no way for me to stop Federation ships from getting into the Beta Quadrant. At least not science ships. The military ships won't have the warp range. But anyway, so now I have the Beta Pente outpost completed, so I'm going to be building a dilithium mine here in order to access this rare dilithium, and then I'm going to go up and I'm going to claim that, other system between Beta Pente and the rest of Klingon space in order to have one, solid contiguous border. And then I'm going to be working my way towards the galactic south to try to build that wall. I don't think I'm going to get to colonize Drago. I think the Federation is going to get that before I get around to it. But yeah, I don't want to have to fight the Federation. I want to worry about the Romulans. And then maybe after the Romulans are either completely conquered or in a position where, they'll never be a threat ever again, then maybe I can consider invading the Federation if relationships with them go south. But I could also just go for the Cardassians. So, there's options. I don't have to ever potentially fight the Federation if I don't want to. But because these maps are pseudo-randomized, I kind of know where a lot of the minor races are going to be. So I'm focusing on figuring out what systems and resources are going to be around me before I bother going and finding those minor factions. Because I don't care really about building relationships with too many of them. I want to conquer them. And I'm not going to be in a position to even try conquering them until after I've dealt with the Romulans anyway. So there's no rush for the Klingons right now to find and do first contact with any minor factions. The important thing is building up my military and sealing off my borders to prevent the Federation from claiming all of these really nice... There's a lot of really nice systems down here in the to the south of the Klingon and Federation space. Some systems that have multiple M-class planets, lots of resources. So I want to make sure that I kind of seal those off so that those are exclusively within the sphere of influence of the Klingons and not of the Federation.
We've made a new discovery.
And I am going to send an envoy to the Federation because I want to try to make peaceful relationships. I want to trade with them, but something that I don't know if you're going to see it in this episode or if it's going to be more in the next episode. I don't know if this is a glitch or what the problem is, but I keep trying to establish a trade agreement with the Federation, and the game won't let me. I click the button, I click send, and then just nothing happens. I never get any word back that the invitation was sent. I never get any indication that the Federation accepted or rejected it. It's just like I don't know if we already maybe have a trade agreement, but like maybe that option is still showing up, even though I shouldn't be able to take it. I'm not sure what the deal is. But maybe I should just be conquering the Federation because I can't friggin' trade with them anyway, apparently. And trade is important for the Klingons. I've alluded to this a couple times already because at some point later in this episode, the Klingon economy is just going to suddenly tank. So I need a large buffer of energy in order to power through that, and I'm going to want all the sources of energy that I can get my greedy little Klingon hands onto. And it's really frustrating that trade with the Federation seems to be broken, because that probably would have been a very lucrative supply of energy. And unfortunately, the Ferengi aren't in this game, so I can't sell stuff to them either. So, I wonder if the Ferengi show up as a minor faction somewhere. I don't think I've seen them yet, but maybe they do.
The market is where we exchange resources to better optimize our economy. Resources can be bought or sold here, though prices will not necessarily reflect current production. The laws of supply and demand still exist after all. Automation can be used to generate recurring trades on a monthly basis.
Laws of supply and demand still exist after all. That sounds like it might be a little dig at the post-scarcity socialist economics that a lot of people talk about in Star Trek. You know, there's debate whether the Federation in particular could be classified as a socialist or communist economy. And I would say yes. Other people would say no, because they still have a market economy. But, like, you can be socialist and still have a market economy. Like, the two are on a continuum. They aren't just completely mutually exclusive. But anyway, here's the result of our Tea Time event. So we can get various buffs. And the buff that I want is a buff towards worker production, because workers are, you know, the ones who generate a lot of the energy in the Empire. And as I was just saying, I need a buffer of energy. But yes, supply and demand does still exist. The thing about Star Trek economy is that the rules of supply and demand are stretched a little bit. They don't work the same way that they work for us, because energy and material goods in the Star Trek universe are so cheap that it's actually less expensive. It's cheaper to give them away for free than it would be to try to sell them. And that is something where if you look up like post-scarcity economics on like Wikipedia or whatever, like that's kind of how the theory works. Like this is a serious economics theory, philosophy. Like this isn't just like completely made up. Like real economists say that this is how an economy would work in a situation where material goods and energy are that cheap. And there are some economists who say that, like, we already, as a civilization, are at or very close to the point where we could have a post-scarcity economy. Like Western industrialized countries on the Earth right now are rich enough that we could have the start of a post-scarcity economy right now. Right, and that would begin with things like a universal basic income, you know, free public health care, subsidized housing, you know, stuff like that, where most of the population's basic needs, like the things you need to live, you know, food, water, electricity, and housing, and I would argue education as well, are free because they're so cheap to provide that it's actually more expensive and less efficient to try to sell them. And when you have a state like that, you essentially have a post-scarcity economy. And that's what the Federation has, and that's where people say that they're, you know, socialist, or sometimes people say they're communist. But, like, no, like, there still is an economy. Like, in the original series in particular, there are multiple references to, you know, Starfleet paying officers a salary, and also, in, you know, I don't remember what episode it is, but there's a comment where, that Kirk makes to Spock along the lines of, you know, Starfleet has invested a considerable amount of money into our training and into this mission. So, in the original series, especially, the whole idea of, like, the moneyless society wasn't really a thing yet. That really didn't become a Star Trek thing until The Next Generation. And the Star Trek movies, right? Because you also have Star Trek 4, where, you know, Kirk's on his dinner date with the whale biologist, what's her name? Jillian, I think was her name. And, you know, she has to pick up the tab, because Kirk flat out says they don't have money in the 23rd century. And then, of course, there's the infamous exchange between Picard and Lily in the movie First Contact, where, he explains the economics of the future and how we work to better ourselves. And then there's a similar exchange in the first season finale, The Neutral Zone, where he's talking to one of the people who is revived from the suspended animation from the 1990s or whatever, that we're not driven by the need to accumulate things anymore. But there's still an economy, and in particular, the Federation still has to deal with other governments, right, that still use monetary systems, right? The most notable, of course, being the Ferengi, right? The Federation still has to trade with the Ferengi, so, they have to have money because that's what the Ferengi take in exchange. And, there probably is monetary trade between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, and other minor races too. And not all goods are free, right? One of the things that gets mentioned sometimes in Star Trek is there's certain things that, for example, replicators can't replicate because they're either too complicated or whatever, or the replicator cannot synthesize the materials. Because the replicated materials aren't exactly the same as the naturally occurring materials. We see this with alcohol and stuff like that. Food and drinks that come from the replicator don't always taste the same as, real counterparts. And people in Star Trek know the difference. So, a home-cooked steak, from an actual cow, tastes better than a replicated steak. And this is part of why you can still have, people like Sisko's dad, running a restaurant, and why people would still go to that restaurant. On the one hand, there's still the dining food. Eating together is a big part of human culture. A lot of human rituals and ceremonies involve getting together and eating. So that's why restaurants still exist. And there would probably also still be, butcheries and dairy cows and stuff like that as well. Hopefully they're, done as humanely as possible, because there's still going to be a demand for those sorts of things. But those would be luxuries relative to just having replicated food or replicated meat. So, maybe people would actually spend money at Sisko's dad's restaurant because it is, having real home-cooked food is a luxury. And it's also something that relies on, a person's labor. So, it's something that would be worth paying for. I don't think it ever comes up in any episode of Deep Space Nine whether Sisko's dad operates the restaurant for free or if people have to pay to eat there. It never comes up. Maybe the writers were just afraid of dealing with that particular topic, so they just kind of left it ambiguous. And wow, that was a long tangent for a little offhand comment in one little tutorial tooltip. All right, so we're getting to the point now where it really is time to start seriously thinking about when we're going to go after Khitomer. So I'm actually going to go ahead now and start making the claims on the system. So Paradox games use a very rigid casus belli and war scoring system. If you want to conquer a rival colony, it is not a simple matter of just attacking it and occupying it with your fleets or armies, like what you might do in, say, Civilization, where you just walk your armies into an enemy city, and then you control that city, and then you send your armies to the next city, and so forth. Instead, in a Paradox game, you have to make claims on a rival system or on rival territory, which, in this case, costs influence. And what this basically does is it creates a war objective that you want to conquer that claimed system or systems. And if you damage the opponent enough that they sue for peace, then you can take any claimed systems as part of the peace deal. But you cannot keep control over any systems that you did not previously make a claim to prior to the war. No matter how thoroughly you may have invaded it or occupied it, doesn't matter how many armies you have occupying that planet when the war is over, if you did not make a claim to it before the war started, you don't get to keep it. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going to play any Paradox game, is make sure that you have adequate claims on the territory you want to conquer before you start the war, because otherwise all you're going to get is just a white piece where you don't take any territory, and you just threw away a bunch of, soldiers and resources for nothing. So I'm placing a claim on Khitomer, and I'm also later on going to be placing a claim on Fangkor as well, because Fangkor just sounds like it's a Klingon name. I don't know if the Romulans took that system from the Klingons as well, but it sounds Klingon, so we're going to make it Klingon. But honestly, I really wish that the Klingons just had a claim on Khitomer when the game started. Like, if I had designed the game, I would have given the Klingons a claim on Khitomer for free as part of the starting conditions of the campaign. Because what this would do is it would, give a little bit of direction for the player that you should attack the Romulans and retake Khitomer. And also, it would hopefully make the AI Klingon-controlled empire a little bit more likely to go to war against the Romulans in order to retake the system, because they already start the game with a claim on it. Because something that I've noticed when I've played a few campaigns as the Romulans, I haven't gotten very far into those campaigns, but I have played a few Romulan campaigns, started a few Romulan campaigns anyway, and I always expect that the Klingons are going to declare war on me at any minute, and I need to build up my defenses, right? I need to fortify my planets, and I need to build ships, and I need to research cloaking devices, and weapons and stuff like that, but it just does not happen. Like, the Klingons, and in fact all the factions in this game, are frustratingly passive. And unless they have overwhelming military superiority, a lot of times they just don't declare war on the player or each other. I had one campaign with the Federation. It's not the one that I'm doing the Let's Play for, so you're not going to see this happen. I had one campaign with the Federation where the Cardassians made a surprise declaration of war against me. And they came in with a massive fleet that I was no match for at all. And I had to abandon that game and start a new one because there was no way I was going to survive that invasion. But that is the only time, having started multiple campaigns with all of the factions except at this point for the Cardassians, that was the only time that I've ever been declared on by one of the AIs. Every other campaign that I've played, the AIs just don't play very aggressively. They just expand out away from the other players and don't seem to bother fighting too much. And I wish that they would be a little bit more assertive, but also, I understand why they aren't, because these games have these very strict, very rigid war rules, and these games don't allow for any kind of border skirmishes or conflict to happen without a formal declaration of war. So you can't have border skirmishes, right, or stuff like that. Like, if I see a Federation science ship surveying a planet that I want, or a Federation construction ship going to build an outpost in a system that I want, I can't just send a detachment of birds of prey out to destroy it before it finishes because I want to claim that territory, even though it's in neutral territory. I can't do that. No player in the game can do that, not without a formal declaration of war. And it's kind of a shame, because I think it does lead to the factions being more passive. And they're not going to risk a war unless they have an overwhelming advantage. And they're able to get the specific thing that they want. So you don't see conflicts in this game that are like, the Dominion War, where, there is no real specific purpose or goal to the war other than just the Dominion wants to control the Alpha Quadrant.
Tradition honored.
Alright, so now I finally have, I think, enough influence saved up that I can actually make my claims. So I'm going to go into Fangkor in a moment here and make my claim on Fangkor, and then I can ratify the claims because I will finally have just enough influence to do that. And then it's really going to be time to start ramping up this war economy. So I'm going to ratify these claims, and then I'm going to build a second fleet and recruit an admiral and recruit a general, which I think will also complete one of the Klingon missions. So, as you know, each faction in the game has a tree of missions, which, you know, is kind of supposed to guide how you play the game and, you know, provide a little bit of like a storyline. So I'm going to be building up a second fleet here because one of the requirements of the first Klingon mission is to have 2 fleets, each with an admiral, and then to have a ground army with a general. So I'm going to go ahead and build and recruit those now. And that mission, I think, will give me combat modifiers for all of my ships. And maybe also for ground armies. So now I just have to wait for that second fleet of birds of prey to be built.
We have established communications with another civilization. At least, these signals appear to be sentient in origin. To formally engage in first contact procedures, we must assign an envoy. A universal translator may be required.
And now I actually have made first contact with someone. So I get to first decide how we want to treat other races. And I get to finally use an envoy for like a real thing. And as I said in the previous episode, like I like this first contact mechanic on paper. I just don't like that it's so passive. I wish there were more affirmative decisions for the player to make. And I think the biggest one, the best one, would be if the different envoys were actually like leaders, like the scientists and admirals and governors are, so that they have traits that they could gain and acquire over the course of the game, and they can level up, so that where you send a specific envoy, or which envoy you send somewhere, would actually matter, because, you know, some envoys might be faster or slower, some envoys maybe give you a higher diplomatic relationship modifier after first contact. You know, maybe they might also have other bonuses, like they give you other resources or stuff like that. I think that would add a lot more depth and a lot more strategy to the first contact and envoy mechanic. You know, some envoys should be better at improving relations with factions that you already know. You know, others should be better for first contact. You know, so you actually have like some meaningful decisions to make there. All right, I'm also going to be upgrading the Krios outpost into a starbase and putting a shipyard there so that I have a mustering base for my fleets and also a place to send my fleets back to when they need to repair or upgrade. So Krios is going to be my forward operating base in this upcoming war against Khitomer. And I want you to notice right now that my economy is doing very well. right? You can see I'm generating almost 40 energy units per turn. I'm positive on all the other resources, including food. And the reason that I bring that up is because any second now, all of that is going to change.
We have obtained new information about the star.
So all of a sudden, and this happens every single Klingon campaign, about an hour or two into the game, a few years into the game, suddenly my energy income just reduces by 100 or 200 points, and I go from generating positive energy to suddenly generating being 100 points in the red, and food goes down too. And I have not been able to figure out why this happens. I've restarted the campaign, and I try to look to see if there's maybe some timed event going on, maybe involving Khitomer or something like that is maybe expiring here in 2358. Maybe it's an edict, maybe it's a policy, but I cannot for the life of me figure out what is happening in 2358 that suddenly tanks the Klingon economy. So in previous playthrough attempts, I thought maybe it was stability, because the Klingon faction has its, different houses, different families that all infight with each other for control of things. So because of that, the Klingons have a pretty significant penalty to stability on their planets. And anytime stability falls either to 50% or lower or below 50%, then you see penalties towards the economy and other problems as well. So in all these campaigns, I build extra governors, and I go through all my planets on a fairly regular basis to find out if any are below 50%, and then I send my governors there to improve stability. But even if I do that, this economic crash still happens. So it's not a stability thing. And it's not a bureaucracy thing, because as you can see, my bureaucracy is big enough right now that it's fine. So then I thought, okay, well, maybe it's the result of Romulan espionage. Maybe the Romulans are sending spies and they're siphoning all my energy. Because I don't actually know if siphoning another faction's energy actually takes energy away from their bank, or if it just gives this, spying faction free energy out of the ether. But I also don't know if there are any espionage missions that target food. I know there's the Siphon Energy mission, which targets energy. There's the Steel Blueprints mission, which targets research. And then there's Propaganda, which tries to convert that planet's population towards your ideology. And then there might be one or two more, but I don't remember any of them targeting food. So if this is Romulan spying that's tanking the Klingon economy, I don't know how they're hurting my food income. But in any case, I've tried sending my spy through all my systems to do counter-espionage, and I never find a Romulan spy, and it never has any effect on the economy, so I don't think it's spies that are causing this either. I had thought about trying to make a strategy guide for my blog on how to play the Klingon campaign, and specifically how to get around this sudden economic recession, but I haven't done it because I don't want to make a strategy telling people how to solve this particular problem if I don't actually know what the heck is causing this problem. So if you have any idea why this suddenly happens, by all means, please let me know in the comments, because I would love to know if there's a way to prevent this. Or at the very least, if I know what's causing it, then I'll have a better idea of what I need to do in order to mitigate or undo it. What infrastructure do I need to build? What policies should I enact? That sort of thing. Because right now I'm seriously stumped. I don't know why this happens. And I haven't seen this happen with the other campaigns that I've played. I played the Federation campaign. I played the Romulan campaign. The Romulans have their own crisis that they'll have to deal with, and maybe we'll talk about that if I do a Romulan Let's Play. I haven't played a Cardassian campaign yet, other than to just like open it up and take a look around. But I haven't seen this sort of economic crash happen in the other campaigns that I've played. This seems to be a uniquely Klingon problem. But I don't know why. Alright, and now I finally have established contact with the Bolians, so this is the first minor race that I've made contact with. So the Klingons have different options than the Federation does, so I'm actually going to threaten them in order to try to get some more energy out of them. You know, basically I'm pulling a Klingon protection racket here, like, hey, that's an awfully nice democracy you've got there. It'd be a shame if some Klingons or Romulans were going to come in and take it from you. And that's in an attempt to try to get as much of an energy buffer as possible so that I can get through this war with the Romulans. I'm not planning on having peaceful relationships with the Bolians. You know, we're Klingons, so we're only going to develop positive relationships with other factions who we consider to be militarily strong. And the Bolians, they're a puny little democracy. So they're probably going to be one of the first targets of conquest that I'm going to go after once I'm done with the Romulans. And if I encounter any other factions that are maybe, you know, have a strong military, you know, or a martial culture, you know, then maybe I'll make friends with them. Alright, and now I've also got a new tradition unlock, and I don't really have a concrete plan on what I want this time, so I think I'm going to look around at a few different ones. Specifically, I'm looking for either something that will give me a military buff that I can use right now in the upcoming war against the Romulans, or something that's going to improve my economy and hopefully get my energy credits back into the green. So I'm looking at this commerce tree, but its requirement is that I have to have capital buildings. And I don't think I have capital buildings on any of my systems except for the homeworld. So as far as I know, I'm not going to get any benefit from adopting commerce. So I'm going to go ahead with this Peerless Combatants trait in the honor tree because it gives a buff to my ground forces in combat. I don't think I'm going to need a buff to my ground forces in combat because I don't think the Romulans are actually going to have armies on their planets defending them for me to fight. It's just going to be like their local militia or police force, which is going to be a pushover anyway. But I might as well take it.
Jolan True.
Alright, and now the moment has finally come. It's time to start this war against the Romulans and retake Khitomer. So I could invite allies, but I don't really have any allies, so I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to use a conquer war goal, because I want to conquer the planets that I've made claims against, or the systems that I've made claims against. I guess like the humiliate is more of just like a general purpose war. So that's what you do if you don't have any active claims, you just want to go smack someone around a bit. But that's not what I want. I actually want systems, so I'm going to do the conquest war goal. And as soon as the war is declared, I'm going to send my military fleets into Khitomer. First I have to unpause the game to actually register the fact that I can fly into Romulan space now. And then, send my fleets to Khitomer. I'm going to leave the troop transports behind because I don't want them getting destroyed in space combat. So I will clear out the outpost and any Romulan fleets first, and then I will send in my troop transports for the land invasion later.
Jolan True.
We've made a new discovery.
So we didn't get to see any fighting, really, in the previous Federation video. So basically the way this works is you attack the outpost, and you don't destroy it, you capture it, so that you claim the system. So now Klingons are occupying this outpost, and if we did not have a claim on this system, then when the war ends, this outpost would be vacated by the Klingons and go back to Romulan control. But we do have a claim, so it'll stay in Klingon control, assuming we win the war. So now I'm going to send my fleets over to Khitomer. I don't know if having fleets in orbit does anything. I don't know if they get to like bombard the planet's surface or anything like that to support land invasions, but I'm going to send them there anyway. At the very least to defend the transports in case some Romulan fleets come up. And then I'm going to send the other fleet over to Fangkor to attack its outpost. And then once I have those two outposts, like those are the ones I want, but I'm still going to have to fight outposts in a couple more Romulan systems in order to weaken them enough that they will sue for peace.
Conquest of enemy territory in progress.
And something that you'll also notice is that I'll be pausing combat a lot. Basically, I was trying to get a nice screenshot of space combat for my review on my blog, but it was something that proved frustratingly difficult to do, especially because I wanted to have a mixture of different ships. And when I get to the point where I unlock cruisers, the cruisers are longer range ships, and they basically just fly around the perimeter of the battle and like fire torpedoes into the battle. So it was like impossible to really get a good screenshot that showed everything, because if I focused on the cruisers, then all of the, birds of prey and stuff were just like little dots in the background. And if I focused on the birds of prey, then you couldn't see the cruisers off in the distance. So it was really difficult to get a good screenshot where you could like see all the different ships fighting each other. But anyway, one of the things that I also mentioned in the previous Federation video is how this game goes back to using the old warp drive mechanic from the original versions of Stellaris. Eventually, Paradox removed warp drive as an FTL option in Stellaris and only left like the star lanes and the wormhole generator. Maybe there was one more, I forget. And the reason for that was complaints from players about balance problems. So one of the problems with the warp drive as a mechanic was that ships and fleets could just warp deep into enemy territory. And so defensive fleets and defensive infrastructures like starbase and planetary fortifications felt meaningless against a faction that had warp drive, because they could literally just warp past all that stuff. And Stellaris, Paradox's solution was to just get rid of warp drive altogether. And that was disappointing to me because I liked the warp drive thematically. That was kind of the point where I fell off of Stellaris. So Star Trek Infinite brings that back, and they do make, I think, a couple of changes, which I don't think were in the original version of Stellaris, to help try to balance out the warp drive. So the first change that you will probably notice is that the warp range is way less than it was in Stellaris. I don't think there's any technologies in Star Trek Infinite that increase the warp range of ships. So throughout the entire game, warp range is going to be basically like 1 or 2 systems out from your borders or from outposts that you control. So I've taken control of those 2 Romulan outposts, so now I can actually strike deeper into Romulan territory. So what that does is it means that, yes, you do have to go through the border systems to get to the inner systems. So those defensive fortifications and fleets are a little bit more meaningful in Star Trek Infinite compared to the older versions of Stellaris. The other thing that they've done is I don't know if this was in the original Stellaris or not, but there is a little dialogue prompt that will pop up that will tell you when enemy ships are approaching one of your systems. So you can then pause the game at that point, find your nearest fleet, and move them over to meet that fleet at that system and hopefully defend it. And also, like, outposts, will provide a little bit of defense. And starbases in particular, especially if they're upgraded with decent weapon systems, can hold their own for quite a while against small to moderate-sized fleets. So that actually gives you plenty of time to bring reinforcements over to that system. In my experience so far anyway with Star Trek Infinite, the warp drive does not feel nearly as broken as it might have felt in Stellaris. You can't just immediately fly straight deep into enemy territory and strike at the heart of their empire or at their home world. You have to go through the border planets, at least some of them, and there is plenty of opportunity for reinforcements. However, all that being said, I think there is a better solution to the problem, and it's something that may or may not be technically feasible in Stellaris' engine. So the question is basically, can Stellaris' engine support dynamically adding and removing nodes from the game? So as I've mentioned before, all of the nodes in the game are star systems, with planets around them. They're the fixed star systems. There is no concept in Stellaris or Star Trek Infinite of, like, deep interstellar space. Everything happens at star systems, and you just move between star systems. You never move out into empty space. And I think what they could do, if the engine allowed for it, is they could have a system in place where you could set up a fleet in a system to do like a border patrol, and maybe they can do a border patrol between multiple systems, between 2 or maybe 3 systems. And if any enemy fleet crosses the border at those systems, then your border patrol fleet would then be able to intercept them out in interstellar space. And what the game could do is the ships would meet at a point outside of that system, and the game could dynamically create an empty space node there for the battle to take place. So there wouldn't be a star there wouldn't be any planets there, it would just be empty space. And then you could have the battle, and then after the battle is ended, then you can just delete that node. You can leave it there for a little while, because there are, you can do missions where you can send, science ships to recover wreckage, or possibly escape pods from a previous battle in order to reverse engineer enemy technologies and stuff, and it gives you research points, or you can rescue officers or whatever from escape pods. So you can leave the node there until that is resolved at the very least. So science ships can then travel to that node and conduct those missions, and then just delete it. And then you don't have to have, you don't necessarily have to track nodes all over the place. You're going to have a limited number of nodes at any given time. It all just basically comes down to how many of those can the game support in its engine, and whether it can even technically do that at all to begin with. So the one problem that you run into is, or potential problem that you could run into doing that is, is there going to be possible that you run into a circumstance where you need to create a new node in order to have a space battle, but you don't have like enough memory or whatever to support an additional node? Well, what do you do in that case, right? Or you don't, you're at your cap of how many nodes the game will support. What do? You can't really just not let that space battle happen. That would be unfair. That would be potentially exploitative. So what you would probably have to do is you would have to just hope that there are old space nodes that don't have active battles happening in them anymore that you can just delete. And I guess if we lose out on some of those debris and escape pod missions, then, well, that's what happens. That would be my solution. But anyway, as for this actual game, we have won the war. The Romulans have surrendered, and we now have control of both Khitomer and Fangkor. So we just had to strike at the Romulan home system, and that scared them enough into surrendering. And we do still have a little bit of an energy surplus, so balancing our economy isn't like an immediate emergency right now. So now I've got to send like governors over to Khitomer. We've got to get the population under control. Increase stability, so that it doesn't tank our economy even further. And something that's kind of interesting about Khitomer is that the population of Khitomer is entirely Romulan. So originally this was supposed to have been a Klingon colony, so I would have thought that it would be populated by Klingons. But it isn't. It's populated by Romulans. And I wonder if the reason for that is because maybe the Romulans exterminated all of the Klingon inhabitants. The Romulans aren't the Federation. They don't have the same respect for alien life that, the Federation does. And I imagine Klingons probably don't take too kindly to, being conquered and occupied. So they probably would have been very rowdy. And I don't think the Romulans would have been willing to tolerate that. So I guess they just killed everybody. I mean, in Star Trek canon, Khitomer is referred to as a massacre. And I guess Nibble Giant Games' interpretation of massacre is they killed everybody. Every last Klingon on the planet was killed. I don't know if that's canon or not. Like, I don't know if there were Klingons. I know there were Klingons who escaped Khitomer. I don't know if there were any surviving Klingons who were left on Khitomer. Maybe there weren't. Maybe that is part of established Star Trek canon. So if I want there to be Klingons on Khitomer at this point, I'm going to have to move population there myself. And there are immigration mechanics. You can relocate population points. So I'm probably going to have to do that at some point in order to help boost stability and hopefully get to a point where Klingon population outnumbers the Romulan population.
Spread metric tracks our civilization's growth, including relevant data on all systems and colonies within our borders. If our administrative capacity cannot keep up with our expansion, technologies, traditions, and leaders will all become more expensive.
And here's yet another threat to the Klingon economy, which is overexpansion. So this is another thing that I'm going to have to deal with. So I'm going to have to build more bureaucratic buildings. Klingons just love bureaucracy. In order to increase my, the capacity of worlds that I can control. And now, in preparation for the next war with the Romulans, they did colonize this planet Tramzon, or the system Tramzon, which does have a planet habitable planet, so I'm going to want to take that from them too. So I'm going to go ahead and place a claim on it, so that in the next episode we can potentially go to war with the Romulans again and take this system. And then I'm going to be sending my construction ship back down to the south in order to go ahead and work on building that wall to block in the Federation. But of course I'm going to need more influence to do that. Right now I don't have enough influence. But I just want the construction ship to be there for when I do have the influence, because the influence will come fairly quickly.
Klingon science prevails. Our technological strength grows.
And now I have finally unlocked the ability to start researching a warbird, which is either a D7 or Katinga class battlecruiser. As I've mentioned before, the ship availability and unlocks in this game are kind of weird. The Klingons at the start of the game only have access to birds of prey. They can't even cloak yet. You still have to research cloaking devices. Even the Romulans at the start of this game don't have cloaking technology left. They have to research cloaking devices. And then, the Federation only starts with the Miranda-class destroyers. Romulans only start with bird of preys. Cardassians only start with their little scout ships. But at this point in Star Trek history, there should definitely be more classes of ships. I think at the very least, the Klingons should have started with the bird of prey and a D7 battlecruiser. The Federation probably should have started with the Miranda-class destroyer and a Excelsior-class light cruiser, or maybe you call the Miranda-class a scout ship and call the Excelsior-class a destroyer. Whatever. And just the unlocks are weird. For the Federation in particular, the next ship that you unlock after the Miranda isn't even the Excelsior class to begin with. It's the Intrepid class, which you'd think would be a late game unlock. The Klingons at least get, a sensical unlock as their second ship, which is the Warbird, the battlecruiser. But I still think they should have started the game with that. But anyway, that wraps up our war with the Romulans. We've retaken Khitomer, so now the next episode is going to be all about my efforts to try to stabilize the Klingon economy before we completely suffocate. So that episode will, of course, be exclusive to Patreon. So if you want to see that, you'll have to become a Patreon contributor. And when that is available, I will post a link either in the description of this video or I will post it as a pinned comment. If you do decide to contribute on Patreon, thank you for your contribution. Thanks as well to everybody who is currently or has in the past contributed. It really does help offset the costs of doing all of this. And I hope to see you again for future installments.